Welcome everyone to Big Ideas Night presents Pride. I'm Will Lanier, founder and executive director of the Out Foundation, a U.S. nonprofit dedicated to removing the barriers that block LGBTQ+ access to health, wellness, and fitness, allowing our community to live healthier, more fulfilled lives, no matter their background or economic status. Before we get started, I'd love for you all to whip out your phones and shoot a quick text for me. So if you're ready, text the words PRIDE20, PRIDE20, no spaces, to the number 44321. You'll get a link to find out more about our organization and to donate to our mission if you're able to. Tonight, we're going to be celebrating Pride by reflecting on what it means for our community today, what it meant for those in the LGBTQIA community who came before us, and what we can do today to ensure a bright future for our community. You'll hear from authors Arlan Hamilton, John Dabari, R. Eric Thomas, Nico Tortorella, and Jesse Shevchek. They'll be sharing their stories and some readings about what Pride means to them. So without any further delay, our first author, Arlan Hamilton, pronouns she, her. Arlan is the founder and managing partner of Backstage Capital, a venture capital firm dedicated to minimizing funding disparities in tech by investing in high potential founders who are people of color, women, and or part of the LGBTQ community. Backstage Capital has now invested more than $5 million into more than 100 startup companies led by underestimated founders. In 2018, Arlan co-founded Backstage Studio, which launched 4 accelerator programs in Detroit, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and London. And she is the first non-celebrity Black woman to be featured on the cover of Fast Company. So welcome, Arlan Hamilton.
Hello, hi everybody. Thanks for having me and thanks for being here. I know that time is more and more precious every day, especially with everything that's going on right now. Everything. I think about the intersectionality of this moment as well. So thanks for having me. I have a new book out called It's About Damn Time. You might have noticed in the background here. And I spend a lot of time, I spent the last almost decade working on getting more funding and resources into the hands of underrepresented founders of startup companies. And that includes women, people of color, and LGBTQ founders, because I identify as all three. And so my book is about that journey so far. I think I'm just getting started. Briefly, if you're not familiar with the story, I will be 40 this year, and for 35 of those years, I was completely, we call it in the industry broke. It's a technical term we use in the industry, and I had a lot of housing insecurity, a lot of those issues, and I know, unfortunately, many people in the LGBTQ community face that, like an overwhelming percentage. And you'll learn more in the book, but ultimately I was able to, with a lot of grit and tenacity and moving forward, and a lot of tears and a lot of setbacks along the way, I was able to raise several $1 million and generate several $1 million in revenue over the past 5 or so years. And I have now invested in more than 100 companies led by underrepresented founders, and have it's just been an honor, and it's been an amazing journey so far. And so back in the day, I don't think this was mentioned in my intro, but back in the day, because I spend so much time talking about tech companies and startup investing and all of that across my 3 companies and my fund, I don't get to talk a lot about the years in between. So my mid to late 20s mostly, and early 30s, where I ran a blog called Your Daily Lesbian Moment. And some of you, I don't know if anybody here would recognize, maybe not, maybe too small of a group to recognize, but I used to sell these shirts that said "Shane is my homo girl" and "Shane is my home girl" for you L Word fans. from that site, I had the very first tech company I ever wanted to start, which got me into this whole world of tech companies, was called Juliet and Juliet. And so I kind of kicked that off with a pilot and then got distracted by building a multi-million-dollar venture fund. But there's always been sort of this is as much a part of me as anything. And so I don't get to talk about it as much or convene with people as much about it. So I'm just really drawn to moments when I can do that and talk about it. Kind of a side note, I'll be interviewing, I don't know if I can say this, but I'll be interviewing the cast of the L Word next week for an event, which is like a 360 moment, or 360 moment for sure. Because I created the Twitter account Modern L Word, which is like modern Seinfeld. So I have like a what if account. Anyway, in the book, you'll learn a lot about my gay side, the gay part of me. I'm married to Queer German Girl. Her handle is Queer German Girl. She is, let me break it down. She's queer. She is German, and she is a girl. And she's an amazing composer, and she creates videos, and she's just an amazing person. And get to talk about her in my book. I talk about major breakups and how they've led to amazing business developments somehow, some way. I also describe an altercation in an IHOP parking lot that involved fighting lesbians, which I'm sure half of us have experienced. And you probably have experienced it at the same IHOP as one of the experiences, because there were two. There were two experiences at a IHOP parking lot with lesbian infighting. One of them was in West Hollywood, so I absolutely know there's no way that there's not another person here who has experienced that. And we talk about just kind of wrapping up. I think the time right now. I've had a lot of conversations with allies the last few days, because I'm sure you can imagine that, and those of you who are Black women and Black people have been hit up a lot by your ally friends, and you are the everything. You are the Oracle. You are the Google for your ally friends, and best intentions, and we all understand that. So I don't begrudge it. I appreciate it. I'd rather they reached out than not. But it has been an exhausting experience, especially someone who's such an empath. But one of the things I realize is that it's hard to express your being sorry, and it's hard to not take things personally and not like break down who you are as a person while apologizing. And it reminded me this weekend, it reminded me of a blog post I put up five years ago almost, where I just listed 3 major things that I had gotten wrong in the previous 10 years. So, and reposting that this weekend was so difficult for me to do, but it was like really meta, but I felt it would be a good way of expressing how, owning up to being wrong in the past. It can be very difficult, but it can also be healing. And then on the other side of that, being forgiven is really powerful. And I've been accused of a lot of things in the last few days, and being an apologist for white people and this and that and the other. But I just feel like if we're not going to accept the apologies, or accept the changes, or accept the true change in a person, what are we really asking them to do then? What do we expect them to do? So I don't have an answer to it. It just posed the question. Think about that for a little bit. And I just want us to think about that, because maybe, and I maybe, an idealist, but that's what I feel like is we have to ask some very difficult questions. We have to have some very high standards for those answers. There needs to be work on the side of allies and those who are not even allies yet. There has to be more work by them than by the oppressed. And we all understand that ourselves. But I also think that if we can find a way to allow forgiveness for some of it, you think about the people who have been formerly again homophobic, extremely homophobic, and picket lines and this and that, and now they've found a way to see it another way. And imagine if you didn't allow that from them, what would happen. So I don't want to ramble, but that's just kind of what's been on my mind recently, and I thought I would share it here because I feel like this is a safe space to share that. So I appreciate your time, and I look forward to hearing from everyone else.
Thanks so much, Arlen. That was really great, poignant points. And I'm sure, as I told you earlier, I've been following you on Twitter for forever. So I'm hoping people can see all the great things that you're doing and snag your book. Pull my scripts back up. Our next author is John Dabari, pronouns he, him. John began bartending in 2008 at PDT, the world famous and James Beard award-winning New York Speakeasy. He then joined the acclaimed Momofuku Restaurant Group a year later, where he was the group's bar director until 2018. John is now the CEO and founder of Proto, a non-alcoholic botanical drinks company, as well as the co-founder and board president of Restaurant Workers Community Foundation, which is a nonprofit focused on improving the quality of life of hospitality employees. He lives in New York City with his husband and their cat. So everyone, John Dabari.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that intro, Will. Saved me some breath here, and thank you for having me. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. As Will mentioned, I started as a bartender in the craft cocktail scene in New York City in 2008, and back then it was a lot of straight dudes, let's say. And part of what was so fun for me about it was getting to just be kind of myself on display behind a bar. And when I wrote my cocktail book, Drink What You Want, which came out this month, I really wanted it to be a personal book that was telling the story of who I was, just as much as I was educating people on the right or wrong way to make a Manhattan or shake a drink. And so I thought for tonight, I would just do somewhat of a dramatic reading of the introduction that I wrote to the book, just as a way to talk more about myself in a structured way. So here, it's the About Me section, and here goes. Enough about you. Let's start with me. I've been working as a bar professional for about 10 years, and I've been fortunate enough to have spent time behind the bar in some of the best spots in the world. But like many in my industry, my path to the bar world was anything but straightforward. I grew up in a fancy suburb of New York City, went to a fancy college in Manhattan, and until I ended up behind the bar, I was on track to become a lawyer or an academic or something similarly white collar. I had a vague idea that I needed a real job to be successful in life, but I never imagined that bartending would be the way that I actually would do it. I studied Japanese history and language in college and moved to Japan after graduation. I was considering staying there indefinitely, but after about 3 months, I realized it really wasn't the place for me and returned to New York. With no job and a few grand in credit card debt, I was fairly desperate for a job, and I asked everyone I've ever known if they would hire me. One of those people was Don Lee, a guy I went to college with, who was on the opening team of the iconic reservations only cocktail bar PDT, which is short for Please Don't Tell. It's actually short for something else, but I can't talk about that. It's a secret. On St. Mark's Place in the East Village. This was a year or two before it became the legendary spot it is today. I asked Don if I could come bartend there, and astonishingly, he agreed to let me train. Mind you, I had no bars, spirits, cocktail experience whatsoever. But after a couple of shifts, I started to get the hang of it. And by getting the hang of it, I mean flat out pretending that I knew what the fuck I was talking about. I was the queen of fake it till you make it. With 3 or 4 shifts under my belt, I was feeling pretty good about this new gig. But I still had to pass the Jim Meehan test. For all of you who don't know, Jim Meehan was the big boss of PDT at the time. He also wrote the foreword to this book, so thank you, Jim. And he was a big deal well before the bar was. was. I was so nervous to meet him. I thought he would see right through me for the fraud that I was. But unfortunately, he didn't. And I was permitted to keep showing up at PDT every Monday night, even though I was some dude with no experience who still wanted to go to law school. I was 25 years old, which is kind of old relative to when a lot of people start out in the food service industry. And I knew I needed to catch up really fast. So I hit the books. Gary Regan's Joy of Mixology, David Wondrich's Imbibe, David Embry's Fine Art of Mixing Drinks were the first of hundreds of cocktail books I would read. I understood that I needed to stop pretending I knew what a Sazerac was and actually learn how to make one, and also learn that there was a whiskey called Sazerac as well. So I devoured the Rolodex. There was like a literal, actual 3 Rolodexes of cocktail recipes behind the bar at PDT you could cycle through. This is way before smartphones. And I would transcribe them into my personal notebook and making flashcards to study. Eventually, instead of feeling profound panic at the beginning of my shift, which was actually thanks to undiagnosed mental illness, I eased into a sense of comfort. After a few quick months, my name and picture were actually featured in the New York Times as one of the geeky bartenders at this cool new underground cocktail bar. This article helped me realize I was onto something with the cocktail thing, and my law school dreams very quickly evaporated. A year after starting my career at PDT, I was offered a job bartending twice a week at Momofuku Sambar, RIP actually, the second restaurant to open in the now global empire of David Chang. In case you haven't watched TV or looked at the internet or a newspaper in the past 15 years, David Chang is the chef from Virginia who rose to culinary prominence with the opening of Momofuku Noodle Bar in 2007. Now the group has dozens of restaurants spanning the globe and has spawned magazines, cookbooks, sauces, podcasts, and more Netflix specials than I have an inclination to count or time to actually watch. Sorry. Apart from teaching me about wine, service, kitchen techniques, and how to disarm grumpy chefs, very important skill, honestly, my time there gave me a first opportunity to exercise creativity over an entire cocktail menu, not just individual drinks. After about 3 years behind the bar, I transitioned to becoming the company's first bar director, a position I held for 5 years. During that time, I helped open more than 10 restaurants and created dozens of cocktail menus and trained countless people how to bartend. And now I get to teach you how to make great drinks. So yeah, that's the intro to my book. If you want to read more, it's on sale now. Thank you so much for having me, and it's really great to be in this company tonight among lots of new friends. So thank you.
Thank you so much, John. It's a great story. I have like a theme song in my head running from that 1-800-BARTEND school. I don't know if you've heard it, but it always gets stuck in my head when I'm at a bar. So I'm glad there's a book to take my mind off of that song that will inevitably get stuck in my head for the rest of the night. So our next author is R. Eric Thomas, pronouns he, him. Eric is a senior staff writer at Elle Online, where he has written the daily pop culture and politics humor column, Eric Reads the News, since 2016. His writing for the theater has been seen on stages around the world. He's got a lot of awards, so I'm going to make sure I hit every single one. He won the Barrymore Award and the dramatist Guilford Lanford Wilson Award, and was a finalist for the Steinberg American Theater Critics Association New Play Award. Accolades all around. Off the page, he is the long-running host of the Moth Story Slams in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. He currently lives in Baltimore with his extraordinary husband, the Reverend David Norse Thomas, and with an out-of-control collection of succulents, candles, and tote bags. Here for it is his first book, Everyone, R. Eric Thomas.
Hello, welcome to my home, where I have, as it says in the bio, that doesn't look out of control. That looks like control. I would pan around, but I only cleaned this corner of the room, so that's what you get to see. That's a pineapple plant. My husband chopped off the top of the pineapple and then grew it out of the dirt. Madness. I'm going to read a portion from the title essay in my book. Sorry, this is the copy with all my little post-it notes in it, like I'm taking a final. The book is called Here For It, or How to Save Your Soul in America. And as luck would have it, the title essay, which is the concluding essay in the book, is about pride and also about community, which I think is also, that's what I think pride is about. Well, that's spoiler alert. That's where we get to. So I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning, and then I'm going to skip ahead and read a little bit from the middle. It turns out there's very little I love more than marching in a pride parade. Or not even marching, dancing, strutting, queen waving, Elizabeth, or Freddie Mercury, dealer's choice. I believe that you can mark the various phases and stages of your life by what kind of pride experience you're having. Not to say that everyone at every stage experiences pride in the same way, but if you're looking for a rubric, pride works. In the beginning, you're just showing up. It's exhilarating and you can't find enough rainbow gear to wear. There is so much glitter. Maybe you took the train in from some suburb with a drive-through Starbucks. Maybe you snuck out of the house. Maybe you're drinking wine out of your backpack. All you know is you're thrilled to be there and you go home late in the evening, sunburnt and ebullient. Later, you get acclimated. You feign being over it. Pride becomes that place where you run into all your exes and first act shady to them and then act friendly to them, depending on what's going on in your therapy sessions. At some point, maybe you even march in the parade. The first time I marched with a website I was writing for, I was just over 30, single, and was briefly experiencing the hint of an ab. I wore a fedora for some reason, and at the last minute, I decided to take off my shirt because that's basically what you do at Pride. So that year, I didn't so much march as display abs, or one ab, to 13 blocks of Center City, Philadelphia. Maybe at some point you march with your workmates in matching t-shirts that advertise your very open and affirming corporate banking conglomerate. Sometimes I laugh at my own jokes. Oh man, I should buy this book. This is very good. At another point, maybe you're carrying a kid in a Bjorn in Pride and pushing a stroller in Pride and holding a sign that says free mom hugs in Pride. And eventually, if you're lucky, you become one of those queer elders riding a festively decorated trolley that has been chartered by a community center, waving from the window, marveling at how much has changed and how familiar it all seems. I love Pride. I love a party. I love a family reunion. I love getting flyers and magnets from local vendors. I love Pride too because it began as a riot. That's important to me. Every step, every shimmy, every wave is a gesture of triumph, but also defiance. The first time I went to Pride, I wasn't legally allowed to get married. I could be fired from my job because of my sexual orientation. My future husband couldn't be ordained in church. And yet, we were living in markedly better times than we lived before. There was so much to dance about. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to a scene. Spoiler alert, the future husband that I mentioned, I then married him. So I'm going to read a little bit from that portion. Sorry to spoil it for everyone. If you're like, what happens to these two people who were mentioned in his bio as betrothed? Marriage is a gift from God. David's hometown pastor, Ken, said to open our wedding ceremony at Broad Street Ministry. They were words David had written, borrowed from a Unitarian ceremony. The pastor continued, "No union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family." This time borrowing words from Justice Anthony Kennedy's opinion in the Obergefell v. Hodges case, the one that made same-sex marriage equality the law of the land. I realize now that I didn't really know what those words meant then. I didn't understand their gravity, their importance, their scope. Everything I did or said that day was a leap of faith. But when you're in church, all you need is faith, isn't it? I left the ceremony up to David. Just make sure we get married, I'd said. I busied myself with planning the reception, which included a cabaret featuring a live band. We'd hired a couple of musicians and singers, including one woman, Ashley Rice, who sounds just like Whitney Houston. I was only going to get sorry, there's a helicopter. Special guest appearance by the present. I was only going to get married once, and Whitney was going to get me there one way or another. I asked Ashley to perform a medley of 3 Whitney Houston songs that David and I both liked. Originally, when David and I discussed it, I'd suggested that she perform the entire Bodyguard soundtrack, followed by The Preacher's Wife, and close it with Whitney's version of the national anthem. This just seemed appropriate. David is always far too willing to follow me on flights of fancy and actually considered having someone sing the national anthem at our wedding. Bless his heart. Can you imagine? The Star Spangled Banner at an interracial gay wedding in the heart of a sanctuary city with attendees ranging from a World War II vet to the mayor's Black LGBTQ liaison, to my cousin who did multiple tours of Afghanistan, to our nephew, Michael, a mixed race boy, then 3 years old, growing up in South Carolina. Child, that place would have looked like a game of whack-a-mole, with some people standing up and some people taking a knee and some people looking around like, honey, what is happening in this place on this day? Now that's church. It isn't that we have a particularly deep love of the anthem. We just love Whitney. But looking back, I almost wish I had introduced the chaos of patriotism to the proceedings. It was there already. Love is political. Church is political. Our friends and family, queer folks, trans folks, straight folks, white folks, Black folks, Latinx folks, Asian folks, baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, Democrats, socialists, and at least a couple libertarians, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, agnostics, questioners, and atheists, all political. This act, daring to say that we believe in each other, is political. Daring to say that we believe in something, anything, is political. Daring to believe that we'll exist in the future in America is political. At one point in the ceremony, as is common in the Presbyterian tradition, Ken asked the congregation to stand as he read vows that our community was making to us. Do you pledge to support, do all of you, I don't know what he said, do all of you pledge your support and encouragement to the covenant commitment that David and Eric are making together? If so, please say, we do. We do, they all replied as one. Michael's tiny voice followed a second later. We do, he cried. And if ever there was a time to play the national anthem, it's then. It's in this place where something new is being built, where people are united in one goal with one voice, where the future is hard to make out, but yes, it's there. We're there. Better and more complicated. That's the only country that I can survive in. I don't live in that country, but every day by existing, by speaking, by loving, by writing, I make a vow to get there, step by step, to knit together the pieces inside that don't coalesce, to find a community that is generative, or short of that, to make one, to see the future. This is why I treasure Whitney's Star Spangled Banner. It does the miraculous in that it finds something beneath the words that is true and halcyon and greater than the failings of the nation it represents. Hearing Whitney's voice, the response is automatic. It is soul deep and centuries old. It is the awakening of a peace within you that dares to be optimistic, a seed that was placed there by the prayer of an ancestor. It is never a guarantee. We commonly only sing the first verse of the anthem. It's comprised of 4 sentences, and 3 of them are questions. The singer wants confirmation about what is seen, what is perceived, and what it means. And that lack of surety is America most of all. America is never a set notion. It is an ideal scarred from battle, perceived through smoke. The people must cry as one, we do. Is that what patriotism feels like? I feel like I should know, but patriotism too is always a question. It's a concept that has been hijacked and beaten up, sold out and ripped to shreds by those who want it only for its surface rush and not its arduous roots. Anything good in this country has had to be wrestled free. Some say that's the beauty of this nation. That's the American dream, as if we're all Jacob pummeling the biblical angel for a new name. But the tribulations that tinge every victory in pursuit of simply being American and all that that supposedly entails are the worst of us. They are the national shackle, a dark mark across the soil. And so it is a shock when the crisp, bright, free voice of a Black woman elevates our national anthem from the dirge-like bottom of rote recitation to something otherworldly, something spiritual, something that dares to hope. The fact that it's possible is a miracle. It lifts me up. It transforms the song. It builds the country from ash. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was, again, everyone is so poignant and so everything that's being said is of the moment and really drives home what's happening in our world today. So I think even that last sentence that you read, Eric, it hit me. So thank you for that. Our next author is Nico Tortorella, pronouns they, them. Nico is an actor and author of the poetry collection, All of It Is You. Nico stars in the hit series Younger and is an outspoken advocate for the LGBTQIA+ community. Nico recently married their longtime partner, Bethany C. Myers, and they reside in New York with their 2 dogs. Welcome, Nico.
I was muted. And now I'm not. Thank you for that, Will. And thank you to all the incredible authors. This has been really nice so far. And healing and just like medicinal. You know, I think that with everything that's happening in the world, it's important that we seek the medicine. Yeah, in so many ways, my book, this is my second book that came out, Space Between, explorations of love, sex, and fluidity, really celebrates just that, seeking the medicine. And I think this year, specifically during Pride, during this month, it's important for us all to unpack our histories as individuals, as communities, as families, as physical beings, right? As a country, as a planet, and as spiritual beings. So I'm going to read a section of the afterword. This book really, in so many ways, is my story and how I got to where I am and really what it means moving forward. I had a podcast for a long time called The Love Bomb, in which I very publicly started my own education in and of the LGBTQ plus community. And I learned so much about the human condition on that show and who I was and where I fit in. And in so many ways, this book is my love bomb episode in written form. So without further ado, I'm not going to read it entirely. I'm going to read a couple different sections. And yeah. There are so many ways in which I was raised to not see all the injustice going on around me, to accept all the benefits and privileges of being born in America in 1988 as a white male individual, as if I had earned them somehow, all on my own. But I was born on ground that depends on the oppression and domination of most of the people on this planet. I spent most of my life just not knowing this. And coming to realize that we've been unable to see and feel things that are apparent to others is painful. But that's part of what I meant by sitting in the burning core of our histories. This is what I mean by becoming stronger than we think we are. The strength to set aside our egos so that we can change ourselves and change the world. The strength to relate to people, to see and to feel, to step into our lives and reclaim the humanity that we've been forced to exchange for material and cultural privilege without our consent. And through the process of writing, I've come to new realizations about myself, and this process will continue. I might later look back on things that I've said and clearly see how my privilege has obscured my vision. That's okay. What matters isn't that we get things wrong or that we don't see every angle. That's just part of being a person. What matters is how we respond to it and allow ourselves to be changed by it. How humble we can be to accept our mistakes and move forward, embracing that new knowledge with gratitude. It's all part of learning how to be a human in a system that has might have made us all less than human, no matter where we're standing. Right now, it's 2019, and a reality star real estate mogul is president of the United States. Now, while some folks are still asking how this could have happened, it makes perfect sense to me. It's the logical conclusion when a moral order places capital, not truth or justice or people, at its center. The Trump administration has made overt again the white supremacy on which this country was founded. And if you scratch the surface of history just a little, it's easy to see that what we understand as race was invented as a moral justification for the economic model of slavery, the genocide of indigenous people, and the theft of an entire continent. This is the history that made the present. We are all born into a vast interconnected network of material and spiritual traumas. These are different, obviously, for each of us, depending on how and where we were born. And I think it's necessary to see how these differences are part of the same historical process that has led us to where we are now. A country of massive economic disparity, environmental devastation, mass incarceration, and the state-sanctioned murder and oppression of Black people, other people of color, immigrants, queer and trans people, women, and poor people. The optimist in me refuses to believe that we can't overcome our past and change the future. The world is as beautiful as it is worrisome these days. But we still have miracles and lessons and freedoms and the ability to help those in need. We have hope and grace, and we have love. We have one another and we have ourselves. As long as we love ourselves, we have the ability to heal, to transform, to affect change, to be change and be changed. Through my process of embracing my queerness and gender identity, of getting sober from alcohol and healing the wounds that came both from my family and society, I've come to realize more and more how important finding one's spirituality is. This society has attempted to even take this away from us, commodify our relationship to that which is larger than us and sell it back to us. But communing with the spirits is a way to tap into history, to feel how both ourselves and the times we live in now are products of everything that has come before us. The spirits know that something is deeply wrong here, that the world we are living in currently is the wrong one. And for white people in particular, it's especially important to come to understand this, to change ourselves so that we can effectively work with others to move the tide of history in a different direction, away from a story in which white people are at the center, where capital matters more than the planet. The Ghost Dance, the collective spiritual movement and last stand of American Indians before the United States government wiped out organized indigenous resistance in the 1880s, prophesized the devastation that we are now seeing come to pass. In order to make our own prophecies, to envision and work towards a different future, we have to listen to our spirits and use what we see and hear to come together to fight for a new world for all of us. And for now, I'm doing what I can in this fight as a purveyor of pop culture. If my life journey had gone differently, say if I had chosen to be a painter, a lot fewer people would be listening to me right now. I wanted to be famous for so long, and I wanted to make money. And then my life got all fucked up, and I allowed money to stand in the place of my heart. My moral center moved far away from me, and I hurt myself. and everyone around me. It was only when I placed truth and humanity rather than fame and capital back at the core of my beliefs and actions that I was able to essentially heal. My newfound spiritual and political consciousness has demanded that I rethink this idea of fame and what it means to us. Over the years, my addiction to celebrity unlocked all these parts of myself that manifested as pain and dependency. Look, the more famous people get, the more they lose sight of what really matters. Hollywood is an industry run on capital, not truth, justice, or even people. There's a reason Hollywood is spelled with 2 L's. There is nothing holy about it, which is precisely why only a select few make it, and even fewer have a real longevity. In the modern world of social media, our entire life experiences are commodified by likes and comments. But my happiness, my wholeness no longer depends on accolade or recognition to validate my experience. My life is constantly shifting, and now that I have more of a sense of what really matters, I am able to see more clearly. I'm in a perpetual state of fluid motion, astral traveling to every corner of the universe and enjoying the ride in the vast space between. I know wholeheartedly that there is more good than evil in the world. And I know in the fields of social justice and activism, we must show up for ourselves first, and then, only then, will we be able to show up for others. And I know that I'm going to continue to share my creative expressions. Art has the power to change us, to change the world as we begin to imagine what isn't even possible yet. We all run to things that feel temporary and that are numbing, but we have to feel the pain in order to truly heal. We have to hit the bottom before we're even able to recognize the top. My addiction surfaced because of deep-rooted abandonment issues, my own gender, my sexuality, my struggle with celebrity, and at the end of the day, it took me actually getting fucked up to deal with my own queerness. We are all storytellers, every single one of us, in some capacity. That is how we survive. Telling stories is what reminds us to live. And as storytellers, we should make our stories passionate and impactful, make them vulnerable, make them colorful, make them count, make them about love, with love, for love. My hope is that by telling my story, I have helped foster love and understanding for diverse perspectives by honoring the space between that connects all of us. It is in this space that true healing happens. And just as I try to find the last sentence of a story without an ending, I remember the work is always never ending. I am never ending. We are never ending. You, wherever you are, whoever you are never ending. And there is still so much work to be done. The space between everything, all of it is you. All love, it is you. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Thank you so much, Nico. I just realized that in my intro, I forgot to mention this next author who should need no introduction, but I'm going to do my damnedest at this introduction because it is amazing when I read it. So Alicia, I'm going to apologize to you for not mentioning you in the first part of the intro, but I'm going to read this like it's my job now. So our next author is Alicia Garza, pronouns she, her. Alicia is an innovator, strategist, organizer, and cheeseburger enthusiast. She is the principal at the Black Futures Lab, co-creator of #Black Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter Global Network, strategy and partnerships director at the National Domestic Works Association, co-founder at Supermajority, host of the Lady Don't Take No podcast, and author of the forthcoming book, The Purpose of Power: How We Come Together When We Follow Power, out in October of this year. I don't know when she sleeps, but I'm so happy that she's here with us. Welcome, Alicia Garza.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's great to be here with you all. This is very special for me because it's the first time that I have read from my upcoming book, which has taken so long, so long to write. And it really is like my baby. So thank you for joining with me in the first time I get to read from this book. I want to say just, in context that this chapter, this piece of this chapter that I'm going to read, I think is really useful for this moment. And the name of the chapter is called The Power of Identity Politics. One evening, I arrived at my local airport after a very long flight from Washington, D.C. There were delays due to wildfires burning across California, making the air smoky and toxic and thick. I wanted and needed a nightcap after more than 7 hours on a plane, on a flight that should have taken no more than 5. On my way home, I stopped at my favorite bar. I usually go to this bar because it's a place where I can be anonymous. I don't have to engage with anyone really, unless I want to. And luckily, the regular patrons know that practice well. I thought that on this particular night, it would be relatively empty, a solace I was seeking. It was, after all, a Monday after 9 p.m., and most people would be home, I assumed. Yet when I arrived, a crew of perhaps 5 or 6 people was there, somewhat intoxicated, and all of them were white. I bought my drink and went outside to the front patio of the bar for a smoke. As I looked for a seat to rest my weary body, I moved next to a woman I'd seen there before, young, white, hipsterish. I'd witnessed her in all of her blonde glory, getting too drunk and somewhat aggressively talking to people about her thoughts and opinions. I found her thoughts and opinions a bit obnoxious, so I tended to leave her alone when I encountered her, as I did on this particular evening. And yet, even in a crowded bar, where it is difficult to hear yourself think, you can't help but sometimes hear the conversations of others. I listened to one that went something like this. Blonde. Oh, my favorite actor was in that movie. He's Egyptian. White guy. He's Egyptian? I didn't know that. That's great. We need more people of color in movies. Blonde. He's a great actor, which is why he should be in more movies, not because he's a person of color. Also, I'm really sick of hearing all that stuff. Black, white, blah, blah, blah. We just need to stop doing that shit. It really gets on my nerves. When are we going to get around to being human? Cue an eye roll from yours truly. She wasn't irate that people of color are underrepresented in film. She was irate at daring to name it, as if naming it somehow perpetuates the dynamic of underrepresentation. It's not an uncommon occurrence, and in fact, I've literally been accosted by white people in public places demanding to know why we identify ourselves in ways that divide us rather than just realizing that we are all part of one human family. Once, a white woman berated me for about 20 minutes about how she was from France and there was no racism there, and it was because Black people identified with the nation and not their race. Mind you, this wasn't in relationship to any conversation I was having with her or anyone else for that matter. I was literally just sitting there by myself, waiting for a friend to come back from the bathroom, and she saw it as an opportunity to browbeat me about her ideas on race. Aside from being annoying, these confrontations are examples of the persistence of an idea that remains common among white people, even white activists on the left, and is both naive and dangerous. And so here is my earnest attempt to explain why identity politics has become so disparaged and why that matters for those of us working to build a better world. Identity politics is both simple and hard to define, partially because it's been so demonized by American conservatives. Because identity politics is ultimately a political concept, to fully understand why identity politics is important, we should start by defining power. I define power as the ability to make decisions that affect your own life and the lives of others, the freedom to shape and determine the story of who we are. Power also means having the ability to reward and punish, and to decide how resources are distributed. This is different, of course, from how most of us think about power, which is individualized. Most of us talk about power in relationship to how we feel in any given moment. One can wake up in the morning feeling empowered, but empowerment is different than power. Power is about who makes the rules, And the reality is that most of us lack real power, even over the decisions that are closest to us. Sure, I'm empowered to decide what I choose to eat for breakfast today, but larger forces create the options I can choose from, or whether or not breakfast is even available to me. A lack of understanding power is central to how power operates. Power prefers to operate in obscurity. If how power operates was fully transparent, I suspect many of us would rebel against it. The Blonde in the Bar's insistence on ignoring power is a great example of how it operates. Those who have power rarely want to acknowledge that they have unearned benefits at the expense of others. Her plea just illustrates how power functions best, behind the curtain, unseen and unengaged. So-called identity politics tries to make that invisible power seen. The term identity politics comes out of the last period of civil rights and is used as a way to describe the lived experiences of people who were not white, heterosexual, cisgender men. The identity in identity politics is a way of describing what it means to live outside what has been defined as the norm in the United States. When conducting a scientific experiment, in order to understand results, you need a control group and an experiment group. The control group is what happens when there is no change of what is constant. It is what has not been experimented on. It is what the experiment is compared to in order to see if there has been any change. In the United States, white people, white culture, and white experiences are the control against which everything else is compared. For people who are not white, this can be incredibly alienating. Never seeing people who look like you in fashion magazines, not being able to get makeup that matches your skin tone. Whiteness as the control looks like clothes that only fit a certain body type, as defined by whiteness. Whiteness as the control looks like nude tones on Band-Aids or pantyhose, or makeup being a certain shade of peach. Whiteness, white identity, is a core organizing principle for America. Identity politics was developed by Black feminists who refused to be defined personally or politically by a set of standards that were not their own. The term first appears in the Combahee River Collective statement, published in 1974 by a group of Black feminists attempting to locate themselves in social movements that purported to fight for their freedom, but that were constrained by their replication of the very dynamics they sought to destroy. For the Combahee River Collective, their life experiences were shaped by what they called interlocking oppressions: racism, sexism, capitalism, heterosexism, and the like. They committed themselves to being anti-racist, unlike their white counterparts, and anti-sexist, unlike their white and Black male counterparts. The experiences they had in the women's movement led them to conclude that the movement was primarily designed for the freedom of white women and not for the freedom of all women. Similarly, the experience they had in the Black freedom movement was that it was primarily designed for the liberation of Black men and not for the freedom of all Black people. As such, they sought political spaces that would allow for the complexity of their experiences as Black women who were lesbians. They realized that if they did not fight for themselves, no one was coming to fight for them. They coined the term identity politics to mean that they would form a politic based on their own experiences and the desire for their own liberation, as opposed to a politic that focused on the liberation of someone else. This focusing, they said, on our own oppression is embodied in the concept of identity politics. We believe that the most profound and potentially most radical politics come directly out of our own identity, as opposed to working to end someone else's oppression. To be recognized as human, levelly human, is enough. A political contribution which we feel we have already made is the expansion of the feminist principle that the personal is political. We've spent a great deal of energy delving into the cultural and experiential nature of our oppression out of necessity, because none of these matters has ever been looked at before. No one has ever examined the multi-layered texture of Black women's lives. Okay, quickly. The personal is political is an adage that comes out of the women's movement, and yet the members of the Combahee River Collective took that adage and made it specific to the lives of Black women. Identity politics in this case meant that Black women could not afford to cast aside Black men because of their shared experiences with racism, and yet had to contend with the fact that Black men, white women, and white men all found benefit from the oppression of Black women. Identity politics then becomes a defiant rejection of the flattening of their lived experiences for the sake of uniformity or unity. Black women could not and still cannot afford a women's movement that sees gender oppression only through the lens of white women. This has been an underlying principle of Black feminism, the notion that the experiences of Black women are unique and complex and must be seen as such in order to achieve the goal of eradicating those differences. And yet many white feminists cannot understand why Black women just don't get in line. Why create a separate racial identity? If whiteness is a kind of collective amnesia, then this kind of white feminism that asks Black women to forget is certainly one of its manifestations. Should Black women forget that under slavery they were forced to nurse white children while neglecting their own? Should Black women forget the ire they faced from white women whose husbands lusted after Black women in subjugated positions? Should Black women forget white feminist heroes like Susan B. Anthony defiantly declaring that she would never support the right of Black women to vote? Historically speaking, there is little reason for Black women to have much faith that white women will fight for Black women to be free as they fight for themselves. Though there is much to gain from equity among all subjugated genders, it is also true that America has historically subordinated white women under white men, but given them power and privilege over Black women. Thus, identity politics is the radical notion that your worldview is shaped by your experiences and history, and that those experiences will vary in relationship to the power a group or an individual has in the economy, society, or democracy. And given that America is powered by the politics of white identity, whiteness itself is the first and essential enactment of identity politics. America is built on white identity politics. The attempted genocide of indigenous people in the Americas in order to access the land and resources needed to build a white Christian nation, the enslavement of people from the African diaspora in order to secure free labor to build a white Christian nation, the exploitation, internment, and degradation of Chinese or other Asian and Pacific Islander immigrant labor in order to propel commerce forward for the purposes of making the white Christian nation the most powerful in the world. Why does this matter? Let's go back to the story of the blonde in the bar. It isn't fair to say that only white people express the notions declared by the blonde in the bar, but it is fair to say that white people who are irate about any group daring to declare that their experiences are different fail to understand the role that white people play in those experiences. I often laugh to myself when I hear sentiments like those expressed by the blonde in the bar, because the first thing that comes to mind is, you brought this on yourself. In other words, if white people had not created false classifications for people based on skin color or genitalia or class status in order to maintain power and privilege over others, would we even be having this conversation? If white people had not enacted a system of enslavement where Black people from the Caribbean, Africa, and Latin America were stolen and forced into subjugation for generations, would we be having this conversation? If the effects and impacts of maintaining that system of enslavement and subjugation, where Black people are seen as less than human and undeserving of compassion, resources, dignity, and in many cases life, were not ongoing, would there be any reason for Black people to seek safety in those who share their experiences? Identity is the elephant in America's room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. If that was just a preview, I'm really excited to pick up Purpose of Power when it comes out. So October 2020, y'all. We've got one more author. Let's see, pulling up my script here. Jesse Shevchik, pronouns he, him, is a food writer and recipe developer based in New York. He graduated from the Culinary Institute of America and has had work published in Bake from Scratch, BuzzFeed, Food 52, The Kitchen, Honest Cooking, Tasty, and several other publications. So last and definitely not least, Jesse Shevchak.
Hello, everyone. Yes, so I'm going to be reading out of the cookbook, Tasty Pride. And the whole concept of the book is that we are using the publishing platform, we're using the Tasty platform to amplify this amazing work that the queer food community does, oftentimes behind the scenes. We're working in kitchens. So in that spirit, I am reading 3 head notes. And tomorrow, for everyone who signed up, we are going to send out all their information, their social handles, their websites, so you can order their products, you can support them, because that's what this is all about. So the first one is by an incredible entrepreneur named Sana Javeri Kadri, and she owns Diaspora, which is a queer woman of color-led business that aims to put money, equity, and power into the hands of small organic spice farmers that are kind of leading the way in sustainability, and she's just incredible. So I'll read from that. My coming out coincided with having to learn how to feed myself when I reached my early 20s, so food will always feel like a bit of a triumph to me. In learning how to cook, I learned how to survive, and food became my life's biggest passion. By leaving Mumbai, a place that once rejected me, and eventually coming back and making peace with the place, I found myself, my queer identity, and my life's purpose, which enabled me to come home in more ways than one. Now I live between Mumbai and Oakland, the latter where I have a home with my partner, Rosie. She is my self-proclaimed carby Barbie, dancing in the kitchen, absolute blessing of a girlfriend who has taught me to love carbs again, to eat well, and to know that my body is at its best when it's nourished. I could not love her more for it. Our kitchen is a combination of Indian, California, Japanese, and Northern Italian influences, and everyone is always well-fed and truly full, which in itself is a joy I didn't grow up thinking I deserved. This brothy, fully loaded rice recipe is simple, but it's my ideal dinner at home, a tasty bowl of grains with my babe, the queer life I never knew was possible, and yet here we are. Again, this is Sana, and you should definitely check out her spice company, Diaspora. It's just incredible. It is the best spices I've ever had. So this next one is by another entrepreneur. His name is Andre Springer. We're going to share out the information tomorrow. He owns Shaquanda Hot Sauce. He's also Shaquanda. He's an incredible drag performer, and he makes Barbadian-inspired hot sauce, and their company is located in Harlem. So I'm going to read from that. Andre contributed this incredible dip recipe. I like to relate onions back to my drag. If they were makeup, caramelized onions would be my foundation, dehydrated varieties would add a touch of highlight, and raw ones would be my lashes. A good drag performance needs layers, just like onions add layers and complexity to a recipe. Some drag performances need a venue, while others simply need a good dip to keep the party going. Dips are great for crowds, they please everyone. This dip, made with a generous amount of onions, is inspired by the love of the allium and the many layers that go into a good performance. It's savory, rich, and the perfect thing to serve at a party. It takes humble ingredients and transforms them into something worthy of a celebration. So again, Shaquanda's hot sauce is just incredible. And what Shaquanda is doing just with hot sauce, and Shaquanda puts her face on the bottle, and simply having that in grocery stores is just this triumph, using food in a way that's increasing representation on grocery store shelves. So just incredible work. Check it out, Shaquanda's hot sauce. We'll link you the information. The last head note, I'll keep it short, is by a food writer named Elazar Sontag. Elazar is a cookbook author. We're going to send out the link to buy that cookbook too, and just super talented, Brooklyn-based. He contributed a popcorn mix. I only went to the queer youth group for the snacks. At least that's what I told my friends in middle school. But in truth, the center was the only place I felt truly happy and at ease. I wanted so badly to be there, but I wasn't ready for the outside world to know me in the way everyone in that building did. And the room was always stacked high with snacks. Bags of chocolate-covered almonds, cheesy snacks, popcorn, and anything else we'd requested. As my friends in the group went around the room sharing updates from their week, I'd pull myself from the cushy corner of the couch I claimed and fill a plastic cup to the brim. Even in that room, surrounded by all the love, I wasn't ready to come out or share my story. I'd pass when it was my turn to talk, throwing back handfuls of popcorn. 10 years later, surrounded by an enormously loving community, my life couldn't be any gayer. But when things get tough or stressful, I think back to those youth group meetings and the calm that settled over me as I sat on that couch eating snacks. I don't quite have the sweet tooth I used to, and I'm not as big on cheesy crackers either. So I build my own snack mix. I pop the corn kernels in coconut oil, twist almonds, and toss the still warm mixture with sesame seeds, nutritional yeast, and spices. So again, that's Elzar Sontag. Totally check out his work. And I'll keep it short, but as the last speaker, I will say that this Pride Month is especially important. And I want to encourage, all allies and all queer folks tuned in right now, if you're able to march, if you're able to send emails, if you're able to ask for legislation, to donate, you should, because we need to keep in mind that, Stonewall Pride started as a fight against police brutality, and it is up to us to continue that fight. So if you're not standing with Black Lives Matter and you're part of the queer community, there's nothing for you to be proud of. So happy Pride.
Thank you, Jesse. That was a very great ending and a very great point to drive home. Sorry, my dog wanted to say hi. This is Cash. Thanks to all the amazing authors, Arlen Hamilton, John DeBerry, R. Eric Thomas, Nico Tortorella, Alicia Garza, and Jesse Shevchek. Today was such a treat for me. I hope everyone who's watched it enjoys it or enjoyed it. I believe this is going to be on YouTube. So if you were unable to check it out live, you're probably watching it now on YouTube. So thanks so much. I'm Will Lanier, again with the Out Foundation. If you can head on over to theoutfoundation.org, check us out. And thanks so much to Random House and to Ben and Jerry's for putting this all